The first warning was not snow. It was a black stone lying on a frozen ridge in early October, warm enough to melt the frost around it. Maribel found it above the mining town of Iron Hollow, where the pines bent in a wind that should not have arrived for another 2 months. She knelt in the brittle grass and picked up the stone with bare fingers. It should have burned with cold. Instead, heat moved into her palm. Mara did not understand it, not yet. Behind her, her 8-year-old son Elias dragged a stick through a crust of ice along the trail.
"Are we going home?"
he asked. Mara looked past him toward the valley. Smoke rose from chimneys. Ore carts crawled along the rail spur. Men stood outside the assay office laughing into their collars. The whole town looked safe from a distance, but the mountain was saying something different. The crows had vanished from the slag heaps. Elk were feeding low in the canyon before the aspens had finished turning. The creek had a rim of ice at dawn. Even the horses at the livery had grown rough, early coats, as if their bodies knew what human pride refused to admit. Mara slipped the warm stone into her coat pocket. For the first time in weeks, she felt less afraid of being wrong than of being ignored. Mara had not always been the woman people laughed at. Before the cave-in killed her husband, Caleb, she had kept the books for a boarding house, raised hens behind a wash shed, and learned the mountain because knowing it saved firewood. She knew which clouds brought dry lightning. She knew which wind meant the creek would rise. She knew which animal trails went silent before a hard freeze. After Caleb died, Iron Hollow reduced her to one word: widow. Not observer, not worker, not mother, just widow. So when she walked into town 2 mornings later with a wrapped notebook under her arm, people saw grief before they saw evidence. Mr. August Vale sat inside the mine office beneath a framed map of claims he did not dig himself. He owned the largest shaft, the store, 2 warehouses, and most of the debt in Iron Hollow. His boots were polished. His stove was full. His confidence warmed the room better than coal. Mara stood before his desk and opened the notebook. "The animals have moved down early," she said. "The North Creek is freezing at the edges before sunrise. The beaver dams above Miller's Cut are twice their usual height. The grass is curing too fast. We need to bring in flour now and cut more wood before the passes close." Vale glanced at the pages without touching them. "You walked all the way here to tell me a beaver is nervous?" Mara kept her voice steady. "I walked here because the mountain is preparing for a winter we are not prepared for." He smiled then, the kind of smile that makes a room colder. "Mara, weather does not take orders from widows with notebooks." Outside, a gust struck the window so hard the glass gave a small, sharp cry. Vale did not look toward it. "The shipment schedule stands," he said. "The men will keep working. The store will sell through the fall as planned. Panic is more dangerous than frost." Mara closed the notebook, but not because she agreed. Because she understood that Vale was not listening for truth. He was listening for anything that threatened control. By nightfall, the joke had reached the washhouse, the saloon, and the chapel steps. Maribel could hear squirrels talk. Maribel thought stones had secrets. Maribel wanted the town to stop mining because the elk looked cold. For 6 days the sky stayed clear. That was all Iron Hollow needed. Men laughed louder when Mara passed. Women who once borrowed yeast from her turned their faces away. Children repeated things they did not understand. Elias heard them and walked closer to his mother, his small hand knotted in the back of her coat. Then, on the 7th afternoon, 2 deputies came to the room behind the laundry where Mara and Elias slept. They did not take off their hats. "You have until sundown," one said. Mara stared at him. "For what?" "To leave town." There was no hearing. The second deputy shifted his weight and looked at the floor. The first man said, "Mr. Vale says you're spreading fear, costing the store orders, upsetting the miners' families. The council agrees." "There is no council," Mara said. Neither man answered. Everyone knew Iron Hollow had a council only when Vale needed the word. Elias stood beside the stove, clutching Caleb's old scarf. "Where are we supposed to go?" he asked. The deputy's face tightened, but his voice did not soften. "That is not my decision." After they left, the room seemed smaller than it had ever been. One trunk, 2 blankets, half a loaf of rye, a tin cup, Caleb's scarf, Mara's notebook, and in her pocket, the warm black stone. She set it on the table. A ring of frost water formed around it where the cold had glazed the wood near the window. Mara watched that tiny circle grow. Then she looked north, toward the limestone ridge, and the place where vapor had risen from a crack in the mountain. She had no house left, no wagon, no protection. But she had a direction. By sunset, Mara and Elias were walking out of Iron Hollow while the town watched from porches and lit windows. Nobody stopped them. That was the part Elias remembered for the rest of his life. Not the cold, the watching. The first night on the ridge stripped all dignity from them. Wind crawled under the blanket. It found elbows, ribs, fingers, any bit of skin the wool did not cover. Mara wedged Elias beneath an overhang and wrapped herself around him until her own back shook against the stone. The stars were so clear they looked cruel. Elias tried not to cough because every cough made Mara pull him closer. Near dawn, he whispered, "Can we go back?" Mara wanted to say yes. She pictured herself kneeling in Vale's office, apologizing for every true thing she had said. She pictured a stove, a wall, a cup of hot water. She pictured survival purchased with humiliation. Then the black stone pressed against her hip, still warm. After a night that froze the canteen solid, the stone was warm. Mara pulled it out and held it between both hands. A question cut through her exhaustion. If the stone could keep its heat, what had heated it? The second day, they climbed. No trail led to the limestone split. Mara found it by memory and stubbornness, through thorn brush and gray shale, past junipers bent sideways by years of wind. Elias stumbled often. His face had gone pale under the red bite of cold. When he spoke, his voice sounded thin. At last, Mara saw the crack. It was no wider than a church door turned sideways, hidden behind old roots and a curtain of dead brush. Steam did not pour from it, nothing so dramatic. Only a faint breath of vapor lifted into the freezing air and disappeared. Mara broke the brush away with numb hands. The opening smelled of wet stone and iron. She squeezed in first, then pulled Elias after her. The world changed in 3 steps. The wind vanished. The ache in her teeth eased. The air did not become warm, not at the entrance, but it stopped attacking them. They moved downward through a sloping seam in the limestone. The passage widened into a low chamber where the walls glittered with mineral threads. Somewhere ahead, water was moving. Elias heard it first. "Mama." His voice had life in it again. They followed the sound to a shallow basin fed by a spring that ran out of dark rock in a silver ribbon. No ice, no skim of frost. Clear water, moving steadily beneath the mountain. Mara touched the stone beside it. Warmth rose into her hand. Not magic. Geology, though she did not have that word for it. A deep seam of heated rock. A spring that never froze. A cave breathing through cracks high enough to carry smoke. A chamber hidden from wind and deep enough to keep its own weather. Shelter, water, heat. The mountain had not saved them. It had answered the person who was still listening. Mara leaned her forehead against the stone wall and breathed until she could stand without trembling. That evening, she built the first fire beneath a narrow chimney crack and watched the smoke pull upward into the dark. Elias slept beside the spring with Caleb's scarf under his cheek. For the first time since Iron Hollow banished them, Mara let herself believe the next morning might come. Belief did not make life easy. The cave was shelter, not mercy. Every day demanded work. Mara dragged deadfall from the ridge before storms buried it. She shaped a hearth from flat stones. She chipped shale into blades. She set snares for rabbits and learned which roots near the creek would not poison them. She sealed drafts with clay and moss. She stored meltwater in broken ore buckets scavenged from an abandoned cut. Elias recovered slowly. First he carried kindling. Then he sorted pebbles from clay. Then he laughed once, sudden and rusty, when a rabbit escaped one of Mara's terrible first snares and kicked snow into her face. That laugh did more for her than food. Weeks passed. Outside, winter arrived the way Mara had feared. Not as a beautiful snowfall, as a closing door. The path south vanished beneath drifts. The rail spur froze. Supply wagons turned back. The mine cut shifts because men spent daylight digging roofs clear and nights breaking ice from pump handles. In Iron Hollow, flour doubled, then tripled. Bacon disappeared. Potatoes went soft in cellars that froze and thawed in cruel cycles. Children developed coughs that lingered. Old people stopped coming to chapel. Inside the mountain, Mara noticed something stranger than the warm stone. Near the deepest warm wall, a strip of dirt never hardened. She found it while digging clay. Her shovel sank into dark soil when everything outside was iron hard. She knelt, pushed her fingers into it, and felt damp, living earth. In the bottom of her trunk was a folded scrap of linen. Inside were seeds from the garden behind the wash house: carrot, turnip, cabbage, 3 beans, a pinch of onion seed. Not enough to impress anyone in summer, enough to mean everything in winter. Mara planted them in the unfrozen soil. For 4 days, hope looked like nothing. Then hope failed in a practical way. No sunlight reached the bed. The shoots would die as soon as they tried to rise. Mara sat beside the dark patch for nearly an hour, hating herself for believing in a solution that stopped one step short. Elias was the one who changed it. He was scraping clay from a side wall when a thin flake broke loose and flashed in the firelight. "Look," he said, "a little window." It was mica, pale and bright, layered in sheets thin enough to catch light. Mara took it from him. The next morning she studied the entrance where sunlight touched the floor for less than an hour. Then she propped a mica sheet with stones. The light jumped to the wall. Another sheet caught it, then another. Weak, crooked, imperfect, but light moved where it had never reached before. For 8 days, Mara and Elias adjusted those shining flakes like poor people moving pieces of the sun. At last a pale beam landed on the seedbed. The first green loop appeared 6 mornings later. Elias found it. He did not shout. He was too afraid to scare it. "Mama," he whispered. Mara came and crouched beside him. A single sprout bent out of the dark soil toward the stolen light. It was the smallest thing in the cave. It changed everything. By midwinter, the hidden garden had rows. Not rows like summer fields, not rows that belonged in paintings, but stubborn strips of green along heated stone. Cabbage leaves opened thick and blue. Turnip tops lifted. Bean vines curled around strings Elias made from torn cloth. Onion shoots stood like tiny soldiers in the mineral light. Mara kept records in the same notebook Vale had mocked. Temperature near the spring, smoke draft behavior, seed days, water flow. Which mica angle worked in morning, which in afternoon. Her evidence had not failed. Only her audience had. The blizzard came in late January. It struck Iron Hollow for 4 days and erased the world. Snow packed the town street to the height of wagon wheels. Chimneys choked, roofs cracked. The mine pump froze in its housing. Men burned fence rails. Families boiled boot leather for broth and did not speak of it afterward. On the 5th day, someone found the cave. His name was Tom Braddock, a trapper with frost in his beard and no feeling left in one foot. He had been blown off the ridge in whiteout and crawled toward the only thing he could see, a thin breath of vapor rising from a crack in stone. Mara met him with a shale knife in one hand. He looked past her at the fire, the spring, the mica glimmer, and the rows of green food growing under a mountain in the dead of winter. For a long moment, he forgot to be afraid. "Lord," he said quietly, "they buried you alive, and you built spring." Mara let him stay 3 nights. When Braddock left, he carried a sack of turnips and cabbage leaves for a sick family beyond Miller's Cut. In exchange, he left salt, 3 iron traps, a whetstone, and the first respectful look Mara had received since Caleb died. Stories travel fastest when they embarrass powerful men. Within 2 weeks, people were climbing to the cave with things to trade. A woman brought flour and left with greens for her feverish daughter. A miner brought a broken lamp, 2 hinges, and a guilty silence. The preacher came with blankets and went back with onions tucked under his coat like contraband. Mara did not give speeches. She weighed what she could spare. She traded fairly. She kept enough seed. She kept enough food for Elias. She wrote everything down. Respect returned to her not as a gift, but as a debt. Then August Vale came. He arrived without the polished certainty he wore in town. His beard had gone rough. His eyes were ringed with sleeplessness. Behind him stood the doctor and 2 fathers Mara recognized from the mine. Vale stopped at the cave entrance as if the mountain itself had judged him. Mara waited. He removed his hat. There was no performance in it. "Children are sick," he said. "The doctor says fresh food may help. We have money." Mara looked at the men behind him. She thought of the deputies, the hour to leave, the windows full of faces, the way Elias had asked where they should go. Elias stood beside the garden, taller now, one hand resting on a basket. Mara could have made Vale beg. A smaller justice might have warmed her for a moment, but sickness does not wait for pride to finish speaking. "Elias," she said, "bring the cabbage." They filled 6 baskets. Cabbage, turnips, onion greens, beans dried near the hearth, herbs Mara had managed to coax from seed, enough to matter, not enough to waste. Vale watched the mica mirrors carry light into the stone. He watched water run unfrozen from the wall. He watched the widow he had called dangerous feed the town he had claimed to protect. Before he left, he reached inside his coat and took out a leather-bound journal. Mara knew it before he said a word. Caleb's hand was on the cover, burned into the leather where he had pressed his initials years ago. "I found it in the mine office after the collapse," Vale said. "I kept it." Mara took the journal. Her fingers did not shake. Vale swallowed. "I was wrong." The cave was quiet except for the spring. Mara looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Yes, nothing more, because some truths do not need decoration." Spring came late that year. When the thaw finally loosened the pass, Iron Hollow was not the same town. Some families left, some stayed. The mine reopened with fewer men and less boasting. Vale no longer spoke first at meetings without people looking toward Mara to see if she would stand. She did not move back. The cave had become more than a hiding place. It had become proof. Mara expanded the warm beds along the mineral seam. She taught families how to angle mica, how to read animal movement, how to store root crops in layered sand, how to listen before the emergency had a name. She marked vents. She tested springs. She wrote down patterns year after year until her notebook became a kind of weather no rich man could own. Elias grew tall in the underground garden. He learned to read by Caleb's journal and Mara's records. He learned that survival was not a miracle, not luck, not punishment, not reward. It was attention, honored early enough to matter. Years later, when another hard winter took the upper settlements by surprise, wagons came to the limestone ridge before the roads failed. They did not come to laugh. They came because the woman in the mountain had already counted the signs. By then, Mara's hair had turned silver. She still carried the first black stone in her apron pocket. Its heat had faded over the years, or perhaps her hands had changed. But whenever a child asked why she kept it, Mara would place it in their palm and tell them to listen, not to the stone, to everything people are trained to ignore. On her last spring in the cave, Mara sat beside the first garden bed, while Elias's children ran between rows of green leaves. Sunlight entered through a chain of mica plates and broke across the wall in pale gold. The spring moved steadily through the basin. The mountain breathed warm air around them. Mara opened her old notebook. On the first page, beneath dates and temperatures and animal tracks, She had written one sentence long ago. The night Iron Hollow stopped hearing her. Winter speaks before it arrives. She touched the words with a worn finger. Outside, the town bells rang faintly in the valley below. Inside, under stone, a garden kept growing, because one mother had listened before the world was ready to believe her.